All right, Tech Art fans, welcome to another episode of Tech Art EDU's Tech Art Talk Live. So today we are going to be continuing going on what we started last week when we started dealing with the golden rules of being a tech artist. Now this week we have a question that was postulated by Jamie that wanted to know really what does it take to become a tech artist? So let me go ahead and change this over here, and I am going to get things moving along here, and I'm going to move things so I can have total control. All right. Now, hopefully everything is going to go okay. Like I said, this last question answers a big question that was offered by Jamie, but I get this question a whole lot. And so what does it take in order to learn to be a tech artist or make a career? And in my humble opinion, it takes a little bit of everything. And that's a little bit abstract, but the answer I'm about to give is going to last about 20 minutes, so it's going to take a little bit of time. But so if it's going to take some time, then it's really all about attitude. But I want to handle both situations because depending on the perspective, there are the scholastic issues that we have to be dealt with if you want to be a tech artist, or there are the mental issues that need to be dealt with. And let's get started off with the scholastic issues. Now, all of these are all being covered within my technical handbook series, which I'm currently writing right now, and they're available from Taylor and Francis once they actually get finished and they get published. But they start off with math and physics. Math and physics is super duper important, but don't freak out. It's not complicated math and it's not complicated physics. All you really need is a middle school or kind of pre-calculus understanding of these topics. They're really not too difficult. When seen in context of computer graphics, they actually kind of like all make sense. All right. To be a tech artist, you got to understand some kind of programming. Now, this could be very simple programming, as simple as maybe Mel or MaxScript, or maybe something like a Houdini HScript, or some kind of other script, maybe indicative into Blender. It doesn't really matter. You need at least some kind of programming. It's even better if you know some kind of object-oriented language like Python. And I'm really going to go out on the limb here, but if you really want to learn programming at the basic fundamental level and learn the Latin of all programming languages, go ahead, bite the bullet, learn C++. Will a company hire you or not hire you based on your C++ as a tech artist? Probably not. However, understanding C++ will give you the chutzpah in order to handle any situation. And we're going to explain a little bit about that chutzpah is in just a little bit here. Okay, you got to understand what the CGI pipeline is. And that means you got to understand everything from points to point processes and everything in between. All right, what else you got to learn? You got to understand lighting and rendering. Lighting and rendering, it means if it doesn't matter if it's going to be offline, if you're working in the film industry or if you're working for theme park, creating theme park content, if it's rendered offline or if you're creating cinematics offline, doesn't really matter. It's really the same concept as if it's real time. Now, offline and real time have different parameters, and they kind of they output to different locations. One outputs to a frame buffer and one outputs to a file, but really they're almost the exact same process. So you got to understand that process. Got to understand some rigging. Now, how much rigging? It depends on the context of things. Hand rigging is okay. Rigging by hand is okay, but it's never going to get you a job. A company, if they love you and you're a hand rigger, then they might hand you it. But pretty much guaranteed, if you want to get hired in a rigging as a rigger inside of the film industry, inside of the game industry, and the simulation industry, you're going to pretty much need to know how to do it procedurally. That means you got to know how to hook up the code to it. You got to know how to run with it, and got to do it fast. All right, for VFX. All right, it's the aggregate of all above. Okay, visual effects is kind of like a combination of everything above. You could know nothing about visual effects and still get a job. You could know, everything there is to know about visual effects if there was such a thing, and you could still get a job. It really doesn't matter. And there's leadership. Okay, so what does this all look like when it's combined together? Okay, so here we have everything put together. There's math, there's programming, there's pipelines, there's lighting, rendering, rigging, physics, and there's VFX and there's leaderships. But it kind of depends on whether you want to be a pipeline, a lighter or look dev, go into rigging, go into visual effects, or if you want to be that mythical beast called a generalist. Let me go. I mean, this graph is kind of confusing and it's like all over the place. Let me go over this one by one. All right. If you're going to be a pipeline TA, you got to understand programming because you're going to be in Python or in C or in shell script or something, and you got to understand pipelines, obviously. But you really, you need to be familiar with the lighting and rendering process. You got to be kind of familiar with that, and you got to be kind of pretty familiar with the rigging process, but you don't need to be a master. Okay, now visual effects. You need to understand a little bit of visual effects. It looks like it's a 0, but actually 0 is right here in the center, so that's really about 0.1 or a 0.2. So, but realistically, pipeline TAs are almost the opposite of what VFX TAs are. They kind of like, well, VFX tech TAs, they kind of know everything that needs to know about everything. But anyway, pipeline TAs, they have to be good leaderships. They are people. They work with people. They keep the function going. So they need to be pretty high on the leadership scale. And pipeline TAs, do they need to know a lot of math and physics? Well, they need to know a little bit. They need to be competent, but they aren't doing a lot of computationally intensive things. Let's take a look if you're going to be a lighter and a look dev. Now on the flip side, yeah, you're going to need a lot of math. You're going to need some real good programming. You need a moderate amount of pipeline understanding. Yep, there it goes again. You're going to be lighting and rendering very, very intensive. How much rigging? Well, almost nothing again. It's once again, the rigging is just the exact opposite of being a look dev person. So they're kind of like on the opposite end of the spectrum. VFX, well, you need to understand where VFX kind of come and go, but you really don't need to be that much of an expert if you're a look dev person, just because the VFX people will probably understand the lighting and look dev already anyway. So not necessarily. And lighters and look dev, they're working with people in order to coordinate and come up with a look on something. So you're going to need some pretty good leadership skills. All right, riggers. Riggers here, this is a funny looking shape here. But anyway, we've got a very strong math and physics. Okay, riggers have to understand their math and physics all the way up to what quaternions is. I realize quaternions isn't middle school mathematics, but when a rigger understands full vectors, full quaternions, now they're really playing with power. Do they got to understand programming? Yeah, they do. They got to be a programmer. They got to be at least a competent programmer to get stuff done. Now, you don't have to be a brilliant programmer. You could have the world's ugliest looking code in the world, but it would still be okay because your stuff still runs very fast and it runs faster if you're doing it by hand. So yeah, you got to be a programmer. Yeah, you got to kind of understand those pipelines. Is how is your rig going to work in the pipeline? It's very intensive, especially if you are in real time applications, you're in games or in simulations. Yeah, you got to know how your rig is going to work inside of the pipeline. Do you need to know much about lighting and rendering? Not a whole lot. Like mentioned before, the riggers are almost the opposite of VFX people and lighting rendering, so they don't need a whole bunch of that. Yeah, of course, rigging needs to know a whole mess of a lot about rigging. Don't need to know much about VFX. And the riggers, they need pretty good leadership skills. They are part of a very important a pipeline triangle with the modeler and the animator. And it's typically the rigger that keeps that line of that triangle of communication going between the modeler and the animator in order to make sure they get brilliantly created and animating looking characters. It's absolutely a necessity. So riggers have got to be good communicators. All right, VFX people. Now, these people are pretty much, they got to know the gamut of almost everything. Do you got to be good in math and physics? Yes. Do you need to be programming? Okay, I only give it a 0.6 here. At second thought, maybe this should be about 0.8. I think, yeah, pretty much VFX people have got to understand programming, whether it be Vex, whether it be Python or something. They're going to need to push things off. So I'm going to push that to a 0.8. Okay, do they understand pipelines? You bet they do. They need to understand pipelines very, very well because everything in visual effects is about manipulating things in the pipeline. Do they need to know lighting and rendering? Absolutely. Everything that they create has to go through the lighting and rendering pipeline. They need to know what aspects, what stages of the shading pipeline to manipulate at all times. They need to know how the renderer is producing the images. Absolutely super essential. Do they need to know rigging? Yes, they do, but they do not have to be super powerful riggers. Most probably what a visual effects person is be doing with rigging is putting an emitter on a joint, or they are taking those joints and using it to drive another emitter. Like if you're going to create a dancing fairy that's composed entirely of flame, then you need to turn those joints into flame emitters. And of course, VFX people need to know VFX. Okay, leadership. Well, this is a 50-50 thing. VFX people are kind of crazy. You're going to have the leaders, which they're in film, and you're like your visual effects supervisors who do nothing but lead all day long. And that's all they do is communicate. They communicate with the director, they communicate with the thing. And you're going to get people that are coming up with the world's most brilliant solutions, and they got to convince everyone. And the VFX people might also be the person that was working in a game. It's the world's toughest problem in the world. And so management has put this person inside of the basement, given him that hard problem, and they just keep on chucking him Cheetos and Pepsi and said, don't come out until you got a solution. You know, it doesn't take much leadership to be sequestered into the basement where you're working on the world's hardest problem. So VFX people, 50-50, could go either way. Now, here's this other critter here. Call it generalist. This is a mythical beast. It's just like the unicorn, but just like the mermaid. Does it really exist? And unlike Sasquatch, yes, generalists do exist. They are few and far out there, but if you're going to be a generalist, you got to be ones on everything. There's no two way about it. Okay, how does one become a generalist? Well, I can tell you, you aren't going to be a generalist coming out of school. You aren't allowed. It won't happen. Unless you start your own company, you're not being a generalist. What you do by being a generalist is you come out of school, you spend a few years being a pipeline TA. Then you spend a few years working in look dev and lighting and rendering. Then you spend a few years doing rigging. Then you spend a few years doing visual effects. And I don't know if you've been counting here, but we've got over 10 years of stuff. When you have over 10 years of experience and you've done all those jobs within the production pipeline, yeah, then you can be considered a generalist. And they do exist, and they are out there, and they are brilliant people, and they're really helpful, but they're just very few and far between. Go to GDC, go to the Tech Art Roundtable. There are some really outstanding generalists hanging out there. Go to SIGGRAPH, go to some of the papers. There are some really amazing generalists there. All right. If you don't believe me, go to the Epic Games webpage and see for yourself. Now, I copied these directly right from the Epic webpage this morning on what are they looking for as far as a technical artist is concerned. They want a solid understanding of trigonometry and vector math. Well, that's middle school or lower high school math. Okay, they want a foundation, at least one traditional category, such as level design, environment, art, animal, or coding. Yep, we pretty much got that covered. Okay, and some kind of scripting language. Yeah, like I said, they said scripting language. That goes all the way to Max with Python. That doesn't include C++. Like I said, they're not going to not hire you if you don't know C++, but they're going to definitely want you to know some other language. All right. For UE4 in this situation, you're going to want to make sure you understand things like blueprints, materials, level streaming, blah, 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 blah. It's kind of like standard pipeline stuff. Okay, understanding how computers work from hardware to software. More pipeline stuff, but including how things are communicating on not only the software level, but as the hardware level as well. And all this gobbledygook, what this means is you got to understand the rendering pipeline again. So here it is, that rendering pipeline again. So the rendering pipeline seems to be a very important issue for a lot of things. So that handles the kind of the scholastic things you could go and learn. You could learn from me. You could learn from going to school. You could learn by going to FIA. You could learn by going to some of the other schools out there. These are all brilliant applications, but being a tech artist means you got to learn a whole bunch of other things. The mental game is just as important, if not more important. And so what I just gave you before was quite a huge list of things that you got to know. And guess what, folks? You can't know it all. It's impossible. Nobody, not even the generalists, know it all. So you can't do it. So therefore, save your time. Don't worry about it. But you got to know where to find the answers. Now, I've had many students that were straight A students, their whole life. They had never gotten anything less than a B, less than an A minus ever in their life. And then suddenly I said, okay, they come to me in tears. How am I going to handle being a tech artist? I can't understand it all. I don't remember it all. And I said, well, you can't know it all. And they say, well, that's unacceptable. I have never been able to do that. Guess what? You got to be able to do that. I felt bad for this person because they refused to put any applications for any tech art, any technical director positions, because they knew that they didn't know everything there was to know about everything. They're just holding themselves back. It just mystified me, and I felt so bad for them because there was nothing I could do for them, because everybody knows that for a real good tech artists can't know it all, but they do know where to find the answers. So this whole issue about not knowing, a tech artist must be comfortable with not knowing what to do. It's an absolutely essentially. In fact, not knowing what to do has got to give you the warm fuzzies. Because when I mean the warm fuzzies, I myself love not knowing, because I love it because I get to create a brand new solution. I get to learn a new skill set. I need to learn a brand new topics. Um, yeah, there it is. That which does not kill us only makes us stronger, by Nietzsche. Okay, Nietzsche. Nietzsche said it, and it applies to tech artists more so than ever. Now, for example, now I just had to throw myself recently into the modern ray tracing. Now, I've been writing ray tracers, from 30 years ago, but I hadn't really, but I'm still, that was where I was, writing ray tracers 30 years ago. Ray tracers have evolved so much since then, so I bit the bullet. I said, okay, I'm going to bite my pride. I'm going to go and research ray tracing and look up modern ray tracing, and I'm so glad I did, because, man, I learned so much, and I got to that, and so I'm so excited next week, and I'm going to get to teach my tech art students all about modern ray tracing, and it's just so cool because I learned a whole bunch of other things. And what I'm going to need to learn next is all about AI, deep learning, and machine learning. I know nothing about this. And the fact that I know nothing about it is freaking me out. But I'm getting the warm fuzzies because I know, oh boy, I'm going to get to learn all about AI, deep learning, and machine learning, because what I know about AI is really about 40 years old, and it really needs to be updated. All right, you're probably going, okay, smarty pants, what do I do? What can I know? Well, in my experience, there's only two things that you can actually know when being a tech artist. And the first thing you can know is what is within your control. Really, how can you spend your time? How can you choose which battles to focus on? And you can focus on the things that you want. You can focus on the things that will advance your career, and you can focus on the things that don't advance your career, and kind of like don't put so much emphasis on things like busy work and things that you got to do, but don't really advance your understanding and don't understand your knowledge base. And of course, there's things, what can you know? Then you have to know what is outside of your control. Now, this happens all the time, and this whole COVID-19 craziness is a perfect example. This is outside anyone's control. We're going to have to go and be outside. We're going to have to be sequestered from the rest of our teams. We're not working with the rest of our team. This is not under control. We can't do anything about it. But what we can do with our time is within our control. Take advantage of this time. Learn as much as you can. Get your practice. Study some skills that you have been pushing aside. Really get into things. What you can't control, and now this is a true story, back in my visual effects days when I was working in Hollywood, I was working on high-profile film, and we were about a month and a half, 2 months from delivery, and then, I kid you not, a squirrel accidentally landed on an electronic transformer. And what this did was it caused a spike that went in through the entire facility, and it blew out our render servers, and it blew out our disk drives, and this destroyed about 2 months worth of rendering work. And I kid you not, the next day when I saw the director had white hair. He didn't have white hair the day before. He had white hair after the squirrel hit the electrical transformer. Now that is outside your control. You can't do anything about it. What you can do about it is exactly what the director did do. He buckled the things up. He told his creditors to just hang tight, and eventually, in time, that movie eventually became the greatest grossing movie ever. All right, you got to be a learning sponge. Okay, like SpongeBob, that's where I got yellow from. You got to learn at every opportunity. You got to take advantage. And when you're learning at every opportunity, that means you're always learning. So therefore, you got to learn as fast as you can. When a company says, do you know this? You say, no, I don't know it at the moment. However, the weekend is coming up. I will go ahead and learn it over the weekend and be ready to rock and roll on Monday. Okay, I totally expect to ask any TA to do that, whether that be a programming language, whether that be softwares. I've done it dozens of time. And the most recent one is I was in a situation where one of our sister companies was working with Lua. Man, I didn't know anything about Lua. I mean, like, who actually programs in Lua? Okay, so I said, I got myself a book. I said, okay, I'll see you on Monday, and I'm going to understand Lua. Okay, I came back. Now, mind you, after the project, I haven't used Lua since, so now I can't remember a single thing about it, but I did learn Lua as fast as I could, and I became competent. Okay, remember, you are an aggregate of what you all have learned. So therefore, if you know anything about making chocolate chip cookies, your chocolate chip cookies, your code, your visual effects, they're going to have chocolate chip cookies in there. They're going to be delicious sweetness, and they're going to have a great texture, and they're going to like smell wonderfully, and everything you know about chocolate chip cookies is going to make a difference into who you are and the way you behave. If you like are into surfing or into skating or playing sports, even the way you crochet, it's going to make your way into your visual effects. Are your knots tight and bindy and twisty, or are they loose, or are they somewhere in between? It's what you have learned makes its way into you doing it every day, being a visual effects person or as a technical artist. And this is a real hard one, but everyone has something to teach you. Look for that gold. Okay, now I have idolized many people over this, and I've also thought people were kind of, a little short on the common sense scale at times. But, I remember one thing that kind of caught me off guard. I once talked to one of my supervisors, and we were making a trip. I think it was off to a GDC or SIGGRAPH or something like that. And I noticed that he was in first class. I said, dude, how can you afford flying first class? He just looked at me real simply. He said, how can I not afford to fly first class? That's all he said. And that stuck with me and it means so much. And over the years, I realized, holy moly, he's right. You can't afford not to fly first class because of all the implications. Now, if you're going to learn something from me, teach you, you might as well learn. If you can't learn anything positive from them, if you really don't like them, learn what not to do. Okay, now there was once I worked with a supervisor. He was giving a television interview with talking about the visual effects that the team was working on. He stopped the interviewer for a second. He turned on the cameras, pulled me over, and he said, "Hey, Chris, how did you create that visual effect? Again? Okay, yeah, okay, cool." Then he went back to the interview and he said, "Okay, I created the visual effect by creating it this way." So he totally scammed me. He snaked me. Took total credit for it. Okay, where's this person today? I don't know, but they're not doing visual effects anymore. Okay, if you take credit for other people's work, it's going to catch up to you. So learn from other people and sometimes learn what not to do. Okay, now this part is really fun here because really what this is about is maintaining the appropriate perspective. And in my opinion, nothing captures this perspective like this little situation. Oops. Oh, it's not playing. Okay, sorry, folks. Didn't get a chance to do that. But in text wise, what this means is that being a technical artist is not about what you can do. Being a tech artist is all about what you will do. And if you are a technical artist, you're a technical director working in the film, you're working in the game, you're working in the simulation, you're working in the theme park industry, it doesn't matter. You will do anything to deliver the assets or the shot on time. That's it. Anything. And I do mean anything. So if you're really thinking about what does he mean by anything, go ahead and let your imagination wander. And this is, regretfully, when it all comes down to this, is I hate to break it to you folks, but there are no real solutions out there. There's only three things that do exist, and these are really important. There's only A, those actions which don't address the problem. Okay, these only deal with the symptoms. They put out the fire. Now, actually, these are good and these are adequate. And actually, you can make a career out of this. When I was a visual effects artist inside Hollywood, I got the reputation of being a cleaner. And a cleaner is somebody who jumps into the burning fire and they get tasked with bringing that sucker home. It's usually a piece of crap. It's a mess. But you are the cleaner. You clean up the mess. You drive that sucker home. Okay, there's a lot of bubble gum and wire on there. Okay, the only other things that are out there that aren't actions that aren't putting out the fire, that they are actions which address or at least retard the source. Okay, they kind of slow things down. They kind of like they put duct tape or epoxy in the hole, which actually solves kind of the problem for a short period. Now, it doesn't do this, and so this is a better way of going at it. And so I actually did have a longer career at certain visual effects companies and game companies because I was kind of temporarily fixing the problem and kind of like holding it together with duct tape, epoxy, and some really strong stuff that kind of worked. Now, regretfully, this last solution is you got to take actions which kill the source, which in other words, it addresses the problem and future proofs it. I have to admit, folks, when working with other companies, I never really got to this point. You know, this is best. But I watched people who were doing it and and these folks were the people who either owned the company or they were the company's golden children. When you create actions which kill the source, you're creating tools, pipelines, processes that form the company, that form the behavior of it. And this is the best thing. You become the company when you are a tech art and you are solving the solutions with actions that kill the source. Yeah, this is the best. Now, in reality, tech arts live with answers A, which are good, and they strive for B. But guess what, folks? Option C, this is what makes a career. This is where you're going to get your career made for you, is when you create actions that address the problem and it future proofs it. Yeah, this is what this is the everything. So, asbestos underwear. Tech artists have asbestos underwear, which means, in other words, that they are fearless. That's right. You get to jump into the fire. You get to be the first one here. But because you have asbestos underwear, your juicy bits are not going to get burned. You're going to keep on going. Your asbestos underwear is knitted at accumulating of everything. Because remember, who you are as a tech artist means that you are a learning sponge. That means you're a consummate learner. You're learning from anything and everything all the time. You know where to look. You know where to look for the answers. If you don't have the answers now, you know where to find them. And this was what makes you a GSD person. Yeah, that means you get stuff done. When you become a GSD person, you have asbestos underwear. That's right, folks. Asbestos underwear is green. So ultimately, remember this. This is the ultimate green rule. You have a choice. You can either be right or you can be rich. Asbestos underwear is green. So that's right. If you want to make your career, you want to be rich, you can be right or you can be rich. So that means, okay, this is kind of a segue into next week's lecture, which is all about the pink rules. But this is going to be the first pink rule, is you could be right or you can be rich. But it also is probably the most important green rule, is that by being a consummate learner and not knowing everything, you can be rich. Okay, next week we're going to be rolling this up. We're going into the pink rules, which are a little bit more softer. And if there's anything that you want to see and anything you're very interested, send me your requests. Go check out Tech Art Live, which is a Facebook page. Go ahead and like me on that page if you would, please. And go ahead and subscribe to this YouTube channel, which is Tech Art Live. Subtract to my Chris Rhoda page. Please go ahead and tell me what you want to know. I love knowing. That's how Jamie was able to get me to go on this purpose today. And if you really want to talk to me person to person, you don't want to go through social media, email me, chris@techart.edu. I'll be here to listen to you, and I'll respond to you as quickly as I can. Thank you very much for joining me this week. This has been a real exciting thing. I love putting together this lecture. I love hearing your questions. Please send them off to me, and I will see you again next week with the Tech Art Pink Rules. Arrivederci.